Welcome to Stories of Hope. I'm Christine Hotchkiss. Each week, I bring you stories that will inspire you, educate you, and give you hope. I want to thank my studio sponsor, the Motivated Mind Group, your global creative agency based right here in downtown Chandler. Today is going to be a very sensitive topic. I can already feel the tears behind my eyes. We're going to be talking about the journey of COVID. My guests are Brian and Karen Argo. And this is titled, a story about faith, love, tragedy, a miracle, support, and prayer. Please help me welcome my guests today, Brian and Karen Argo. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking about COVID. This has been a conversation for people that they're not sure what to believe, what they understand, how someone has gone through it. We're going to break some stigmas, and if there's some tears shed, that's the truth of anyone that will have walked this journey of lost a loved one, and you are a survivor of COVID. I understand that back in August of 2021 is when you found out you had COVID. So let's start there and how that came about, because a lot of people don't understand how you just get COVID.
We don't know either. We just got it.
So when did you get diagnosed, Brian? I mean, where did it begin that you had something that wasn't right?
It was the moment when I was walking down my hallway and I started blacking out. And as a guy, it takes a lot for any guy to go to the hospital, but when you're blacking out and there's no reason for it, something's up. And that's kind of when I knew something was up. And I did go to a speedy medical clinic, and they diagnosed me with severe COVID, and so bad that they led me outside to the front of the store.
Thank you, but you got to go.
Yeah, because I guess I didn't meet their requirements, or I met them too much, and they moved me outside to the firemen.
That everyone was fearful of getting it, not knowing what was going to happen. So you were told to step out. Did you black out, and what happened?
No, I went directly to the hospital.
Okay.
At that time, they kept me for 24 hours and gave me the appropriate IV and oxygen, and then I went home. But during that time, in the next 6 days, it continued to get really bad, and it wasn't getting good. And so what I did is I went to another place, one of those emergency clinics, and then they kept me there 2 days, and they said that I was really bad and I needed to get moved to a hospital, but all the hospitals were full. There was not a single bed. And so I ended up having to wait for 2 days, and finally that opportunity came available. At that time, I'll let you say, because Karen was flying, and she was
flight
not.
Attendant?
Yes.
Okay.
She wasn't present, and I did tell people, I'm like, my last text to everybody was like, I think this is a little bit worse than what I thought.
Oh my. So I have to ask real quick before we ask you, Karen, because you're the caregiver, and then you're a lot of miles away.
Yeah.
And anxiety, I'm sure, is in settling in. Were you able, because you're telling me, it was a couple days before you get to bed. What was going on in that couple of days? Were you having a hard time breathing and blacking out? Because you already mentioned that you had to have oxygen.
No, it felt like, bronchitis or asthma. I wasn't blacking out because I had all the oxygen. Mm-hmm. And so it really wasn't showing the signs. I was weak and fatigued like everybody else would go through it. But there was things going on behind the scenes that I didn't know medically, and that was the oxygen level was very low, and it wasn't normal. So that was a sign. My lungs were fine. They were really good. To speak in man terms, they were like, filet mignon, and then they went to the worst piece of bacon, all white, and then they went back to ribeye select, if you will. And so anytime there's any white in your lungs, it's where air can't get out.
I didn't know that. Thank you for.
And I did lose about 15 to 18% of my lungs from COVID alone.
So Karen, tell me where you were in this journey of being notified.
So I was in St. Louis, and Brian called me and said, they transferred me to this emergency room, but I need to go to the hospital. I tried to get home. There was a storm in St. Louis, so it took me several hours, and I finally got home around midnight. My kids were gone. My husband was gone. I didn't really know where anyone was. Friends had taken the girls, and Brian was in the emergency room, but the last thing I heard before I left is they're looking for a hospital bed for me. So I didn't know if he had already gotten there, or if he was still where he was. And so the next morning, my daughters had come home early that morning, and Brian's emergency room called and said, "We found a bed, we're sending him there now. He's going now." And my daughter and I flew over there in the car, and we got there just in time to see them rolling him out in the stretcher to the ambulance. And they wouldn't let us near him. It was like he had the plague. And we just yelled to him, "Brian, we love you. Dad, we love you." And that was the last time I saw him for over a month.
That was a very difficult time frame, and I have this visual, as I have heard and we've seen when all of this took place. I never thought that COVID was ever going to leave our lips, and I don't think it is, because you're sitting here and there are people that are dealing with it on a regular basis. And we didn't still have enough knowledge about what COVID was. We only knew what people were going through and having no hospital rooms and beds and the right care or any care at all, because no one still knew what it was.
Right.
And then to see your loved one on a stretcher, which sounds horrible.
It was horrible.
And not know if you're ever going to see them again, which a lot of people don't realize that every day we're not told this is your last day.
Yes.
You're never told today's your last day. We're told live it to the fullest. Here you have the exact thing that says, here's your visual. You might not see this person again. And what took place after that?
It
You
is
said a month.
like that because life was normal. I was at work. Brian was home with the girls were at school, and in a split second, our life flipped upside down. We had no time to prepare. So from then on, it was just a daily scramble to get someone on the phone that would tell me anything. And then it became my mission to fight for him. It became my mission to tell those overworked nurses and doctors in the ICU that this is a person. I would send them lunch every day. I would send them cupcakes. A friend of mine made a huge poster, and we put it on the wall in his room, or I dropped it off and trusted that it was in his room. And every time I would send food to them, I would put pictures of our family on there. And every time I talked to them, I would say, if Brian was talking right now, he'd be talking to you about fantasy football. And did you know he won his whole division last year? And I would tell them, Brian used to play soccer, so you need to make sure his legs stay strong. So I just was in the fight of my life to get them to realize that this is a father and a husband, and he's worth it.
With that being said, and I'm going to, this is a defense for all of the nurses, the doctors, everybody that was in this time frame of not knowing what to do and panic, and all these lots of other people. There's one of them in how many other rooms?
They were so overworked.
Absolutely.
They worked so hard.
I have an organization, and we actually made a bunch of baskets of stuff and dropped them off at hospitals that we knew we couldn't go in. But we had an appreciation, even though I didn't know anyone, but it didn't matter.
I'm so glad you did that, because they deserve it.
And they did deserve it, and they still do for what they do, that people don't even realize how much they hold on their shoulders every night they go home or go back to work.
12-hour shifts on their feet. They care for other people.
Yeah.
They cared for Brian when I wasn't there to care for him.
And I know that they did their best with whatever they could do, but they also had their other lives. It's like a cycle of they have their life outside of having to help someone else and their requests or their demands or however someone was feeling. It's very emotional to know you're in this state of not knowing what's going on. You're in a state of I don't know what's going to happen. And so that brings me to, Brian, you gave me quite the outline here, which will be very helpful. There is a timeline, because it started with the whole country, the whole world was shut down on something that some people have an opinion of why it was shut down. But there's other things that were a result of, there was some facts in some of this. You have a timeline here, and you talked about you didn't see your husband for the first 30 days. Which one of you want to start with the 30? Because I know yours is going to be a different version versus Karen's being a version of 30 days, because you were probably in and out with medications and other things.
Well, Karen's is definitely more longer because she was in those days. And I was in the hospital for over 90 plus days. I was on a ventilator for 45 days. I was on a rotobed, which is a waffle machine. It looks like an apparatus that flips you, and it's only giving you 3% survivability. Just like being on the ventilator at 45 days, it's like almost less than 1% to survive. Wow. So all of these things were negatives for me. But the second day there, I'm pretty much out. They had to induce me and put me in a coma. And as a 55-year-old man, when you wake up, that is a crazy whole different experience. But during those times, I can distinctively remember two times. One time was when a doctor came in and asked me to squeeze his fingers and wiggle my toes, which I did, and I would tell anybody the same thing. When he said squeeze his fingers, I gave it everything I had, because that was my only voice to tell I'm here. Because your eyes are shut, your whole body motor skills are shut down, and the only thing I had was just the grip in my fingers. So I hope I heard him. That was my goal, to let him know that I was there. The second part, which I come to find out a little bit later, was not a good call, but they woke me up, and Karen has the right name for it, but it is kind of you're sleeping and then they unsleep you a little bit, so you can hear coherent. And I heard everything in the room, which was really weird. I heard nurses talking about their schedules and what they're going to be doing. So you're right, hearing is the last thing to go. And so I was very much aware of the surroundings. But anyway, this last time that I can remember, it was the hardest moment. Every time we come back to this moment, it's such a riveting moment for a man or a family or a wife. But they brought in, all the nurses had to be in hazmat. And this was during the Delta COVID. So it was like one of the leading cause of COVID. Like there was over 6.7 million people that died. Wow. But they brought an iPad and they're all in their garb. And Karen is yelling at me, in my mind, saying, "Don't you die and don't you give up." And it took me a minute to process that, and what that really came down to is like, wow, Houston, we have a problem. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't talk back. I couldn't say, "Honey, I'm here." I could never communicate that. So all I could do was muster up a tear to just tell her I'm here. And it was super hard, because as guys, we typically want to fix things. We want to, just come out of this. And I couldn't communicate verbally. And anybody knows me that knows that I like to communicate. So it was a very daunting task, and it was one that I felt helpless, and we all felt helpless. But I also knew that was the time, like, I did not want to die. I had the will that I wanted to live. I did not want to go and die. But so that was a very, very hard moment. And those two stick out the most for me during the time being in a coma.
That is a very sensitive thing, that people don't realize that we take for granted our senses. And the only thing you just shared that you could communicate with your wife is if you could shed a tear. As you mentioned about squeezing a hand as best as you could, that you thought was the strongest, that they knew you were in there somewhere. Yeah. There was a body, but there was still someone inside there, and then the tears. And to have someone tell you, "Don't die." Well, every day we have that. We could die at any moment. Mm-hmm. It happens all the time. With that being said, tell me your version of that.
So the first 2 weeks it was just one decision after another, and I felt like Brian's life was in my hands as well as the nurse's hands, and I was trying to manage it from home. So the doctor called the day after he got into the hospital and said, I had told him I don't want him intubated. I don't want him on a ventilator. And he called the next night and he said, if I don't intubate him tonight, he's going to be gone within the hour. So at that point, I thought, well, it can't. I mean, he's going to be dead one way or the other. So I gave permission for him to be intubated. And then Brian was approved for a procedure called ECMO. And there were very few ECMO machines. It's a machine that takes out your blood, oxygenates it, puts it back into your body, but it runs throughout. And it has so many risks, but they were using it as a last-ditch life-saving effort. And I think there were 12 to 15 machines in the valley.
So with COVID being not sure what it was, how were they able to decide if that was something they could do? I mean, it's an experimental thing is how I'm hearing it.
The ECMO is not, but they had to vet the patients.
Okay.
And I think because I fought so hard for him from the beginning, telling them about him, I had to be interviewed by another doctor. And she asked me all kinds of personal questions about Brian, and they were trying to decide, is he worthy? Is he worthy to get one of these machines? There's 12 to 15. Every single hospital bed in the valley is full. So he was approved for it. And I told her, I have to wait a night. I know that you need these, but I have to wait a night and think about this because there were so many risks of brain bleed, heart bleed, stomach bleed, and permanent damage that I really had to think about, does Brian want to live with that if he lives? If this saves his life, is he going to have a good quality of life? And I decided in the end to not go with it. And it was a very unpopular decision amongst my circle. But instead we chose this Royo bed that flips you prone, which expands your lungs, because Brian had so much fibrous tissue in his lungs from the damage of COVID that there was no room for air. So he had to, when he was on his stomach, he was able to expand the outsides of his lungs, and it had a tiny bit of air was in there, a tiny bit of space. So they would like to get you to 4 hours prone and 20 hours on your back. So the very first time they flipped Brian, the next day, he didn't even tolerate it for 20 minutes. And they had to flip him back. Numbers went up, oxygen went up, it was great. Next day they tried to flip him again. He didn't last for a minute even.
Oh, wow.
And they had to just keep flipping him back. So he spent much of the first 2 weeks in the prone position because his numbers would go back up, his oxygen would go back up, but as soon as they would flip him back on his back, everything would tank.
Now you were put in a coma, an induced coma?
Yeah.
What was the induced coma supposed to do? We've heard about it, but what was it supposed to do?
Well, he could not be awake while he was being flip-flopped in this bed.
Okay.
You're strapped in. It's like a medieval torture device, pretty dramatic.
Okay.
And you just flip over and flip over. And also you're fighting. If you're awake, you're fighting. And so they wanted Brian to rest, and the only way he could rest is if he was paralyzed and in a coma.
So he couldn't resist what was needing to be done. Okay,
As
that
soon
makes
as they
sense.
would bring him out, sometimes it's called a sedation vacation. As soon as they would bring him out, he would start pulling at the ventilator, which was keeping him alive. It was a life support at that time.
Right.
Yeah, so those first 2 weeks were incredibly hard. In fact, I wrote in my blog, I chose not to do the ECMO. I wonder if I just killed my husband.
And there's a lot of guilt that went along with that entire journey, as any of us will have a feeling of guilt if we made the right decision. And then there's also grievances.
Yeah.
And some people think that grievances is when you've lost a loved one. But grievances is anything you've lost that you once had and you don't know how to adapt to that change. And you're dealing with the grievance of you might lose your husband. And then you have to deal with the grievance of did you make the right choice?
Yeah.
And all these different emotions that you can constantly were going up and down.
Yeah.
Brian, with you being, for how long were you in the hospital for?
Over 90 days. Just right
92, 93 days.
Yeah.
And you were in this induced coma in that entire time?
No. So there's the coma, which was like the first 30 days. Then there was the hospital stay for 30 to 60, and then I had to go into PT, physical therapy, but it was called acute therapy, and it's very intense. Remember when I woke up, I was a 55-year-old 1-year-old. I mean, nothing worked.
But you weren't, because you hadn't been using it all that time.
Well, no, I was paralyzed.
And he could not move his arms,
I couldn't
his
move
legs,
my arms,
nothing.
my leg. I felt like I had an epidural. And literally when I woke up, I said, I couldn't talk. And I just said, I had to lip read to you and say, what happened? And you said you were in a coma, and you told me what was going to happen, and that I had a very long road ahead of me. And
You
that's what I
probably
remember.
felt very hopeless, helpless. And then in your mind, since you already talked about not being able to move,
Yep.
not being able to speak, what was going on inside of you? Because now you're just a body, but you're a person, a spirit, a soul, however someone wants to identify what we are within this body.
You know, during the coma, I came very close. I should have died 3 times. And that has been told to me from one of the respiratory therapists that was in my room, and who was a friend of mine who we had done charity work together, just didn't know what he did in real life. And had a coffee with him, and he said, you know, it was really bad, and you should have died 3 times. I would like to say that I had the white light moment. I didn't get the white light moment. In fact, I had the most vivid nightmares ever, and I can still recall them to this day, which is crazy. Because like if I have any type of dream, I couldn't tell you what it was last night. So that was very evident. Maybe it was then being induced, and it was just everything shut down, and it was more, you know, things come out because of other things being shut down. I don't know, but it was a very. I always felt like I was in a fight, always, and I felt just not right. I felt like I was fighting something that was not good.
So when you came to now getting to a new norm, having to learn how to talk, how to function, tell me about that journey, and then I'm going to ask Karen, because I'm sure she had to be a part of trying to keep you motivated to do it, because I'm sure there was a point you were just like, this is too much.
Well, it was very frustrating because you can't walk, you can't go to the bathroom, you can't stand up, you're looking out a window, your whole day is based on the rotation of a clock and its arms, and it was miserable.
So tell me the journey of you having to learn to talk all over again and eat. I'm sure you had to figure out how to do that, because there was tubes in you all that time that were feeding you.
The big thing, the journey from days 30 to 60, were I was still on a ventilator, and so that is a big thing. So being on a ventilator so long gives you, the longer you're on, the less you're coming out.
Really?
And so it gets really bad as you start getting longer into it.
Because your body's now using that as a means of breathing.
Correct.
Okay.
So the idea was to get off. That was the big thing. And I had not done that yet. And so that didn't happen until day 43. And that seemed to be the big turning point. Once getting off of the ventilator, that was like the hurrah moment for the celebratory that I could see. But there were still more things going on. That same week, I think the next day, sepsis, my blood went into sepsis, and I didn't really know what that meant, but Karen goes, great, here we go again. And then they had to come in and see if I could swallow, because I had not swallowed anything in almost 45 plus days. So there was a lot of tests going on. But to backtrack, right, like in day, 27, 28, they had to put the trachea.
Oh, you had a trach?
They moved him from the mouth ventilator, which you can see the scars on his face from those, to they cut a little hole right here, and that's where they put the feeding tube and the breathing machine. So he was, it's actually a good thing, because then you can use your mouth to talk. And so Brian had not spoken in all this time, and he is an extreme extrovert. And the isolation and the lack of talking was almost as bad as his physical illness. Like, it is a mental fight when you are isolated and you can't speak. It's so lonely, like lonely to your bones. And Brian really felt that.
You talk about mental. We're all in this mental health. It's everything, everywhere, no matter what walk of life, no matter what's going on. It's a matter of how we keep the balance in our mind of the mental health, healthy, however you can. But there's those things that get at you, like you've just said, of worry, stress.
Our whole family is
unknown.
still facing mental problems because of this ordeal. I have 2 teenage daughters that have severe PTSD. I have it myself. Brian, I'm sure, has it. Like, things will just trigger us out of nowhere. I was at my daughter's volleyball game earlier this year, and I walked into the gym and I smelled the smell and I heard the sounds, and I just started crying and I couldn't stop because
your memory.
Volleyball was going on while Brian was in the hospital, and I was trying to make my daughter's life as normal as possible. And so I spent a lot of time at volleyball games mentally at the hospital, just worrying about what was happening with him and trying to cheer her on and make her
Try to lead a healthy life with your children and know that there's worry in the back of your mind in another location. No, actually, you told me before we got on set, you were in a wheelchair up until December, but this recent December, a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
Get me more into the journey of the healing part, when you actually realized that you were actually going to get through this and you could start leading a new normal.
So getting taste and being able to eat and speaking for the very first time. You have to speak through, it's called a bypass in your trach, and it's very airy. It doesn't sound like you, but it is your words coming out. And that was priceless, because it was the first time I could talk.
You can hear yourself.
Yeah.
Not just
some form of communication, right? Other than trying to read. And what was funny, I thought, because of COVID and everybody wearing masks, nurses lost the ability to read patients' lips.
I didn't think about that.
And so that's all I had to communicate. And so that was a very frustrating, I would get frustrated.
I bet.
But there was some politics that had to happen. Karen had to get lawyers involved for PT. We were trying to do some form of PT, but I got to tell you, they literally brought a winch and tried to get me up. And I mean, they're like doing one of these things and craning winch, getting you up.
To have him stand upright.
And the first time they got me at least to have some load bearing on myself, I could only stand 7 seconds. And what that feeling felt like me was, it felt like I was a 400-pound bag of flour, meaning you could push it, you could do stuff, but it's still so solid, and it's still non-pliable and heavy and non-movable. And that's what I felt like. I'm like, I did not think I would ever get to walk.
The second time they stood him up, I was there, and I got to hug him. Like a real hug, not like a leaning over the bed, but he was standing, and I hugged my husband, and it was the most incredible hug that I've ever had in my life, as I never thought that I would get to do that again. And it was a proper hug with him, and it meant so much. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it.
This is 50 days later.
Then I almost killed him by hugging him because he needed to sit down.
This is true. So
I love you so much.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of things in between, a lot of mini miracles, a lot of people, the nurses, the staff, respiratory therapist, infectious disease, just so many people. And they had seen so many deaths. I mean, that was the biggest thing. Karen has told me that my whole ICU floor probably turned over once or twice while I was in there, and all those people didn't make it. And there is no, that's the really hard thing for me, is that there's not I can't really look to my left or my right of people that have gone through as much that are with us or they're not with us. And if they are with us, there might be an assisted living, they might be with oxygen. I mean, I was oxygen feeding tubes, all that stuff. And they said, I will never walk again. I will never not have oxygen. I will never have without a feeding tube.
They said he would probably live the rest of his life in a nursing home on oxygen.
And there are some people that have.
Mm-hmm.
I also believe that our mind is the most powerful thing that we can possess, along with our faith.
Yeah.
And that brings up faith, right? Because the only thing I can concrete tell you is that, yes, I'm a man of faith. Second, the power of prayer. My wife wrote a blog, it's only on one place, and it's on Caring Bridge, and it's kind of one of those websites that communicates from a hospital, so you can tell other people without having to write a text to all these people and family and friends. It is currently, I think Karen has over 200 entries following this thing with over 125,000 people.
I'm not surprised,
And
because you were on the inside and no one knew what to expect with probably their own loved ones.
Right.
And what
It's
people
like day-to-day accounting.
You were the voice for the
this
people
is what
that didn't
happened
have one.
today. This is what happened today. And it was such a roller coaster. He would have a decent day. Maybe we could take the ventilator down 50%. But then the next day, Brian had a terrible night. His vent's up to 100, and we had to sedate him again. And I learned to never get my hopes up. And people would be going, Karen, look, what happened? Brian is doing so good. And I really got to where I would be like, don't say that. Don't say it, because tomorrow is another day. And it was never like this. It was like
There's
this.
some people that posted on social media. There's stuff that people put on social media. I'm like, okay. And then there's stuff you're like, I'm so glad that we have that ability to be able to connect with people we do or do not know on social media. And there's a visual in my mind of some of the people I know that did not make it, and their families showing photos of their loved ones with all these tubes and everything. Did you have to see that as well?
Yeah.
I was shocked. I was able to get in to the hospital after 27 days, I think, to see him for 1 hour. And we had to go through a lot of legal hoops to get that.
Yeah.
And when I walked in, I could not believe what I saw.
Yeah.
I could not believe it. It did not look like Brian. If I didn't see his eyes, I would not have believed that it was him.
I lost a lot of weight
Okay.
in the hospital when you're on an IV. So I lost a lot of weight, and yeah, I didn't look the same.
How did you feel? You said you didn't look the same, but we're superficial people. We see something on the outside and we make our own assumption of something. But how did you feel on the inside?
Oh, it's not good, unhealthy. Like, I knew that I was sick, and I didn't know what the end game was. One of the things that came to mind, which was a verse, and I was like, how did this verse get on my mind? But it was basically James 1, chapter 1, verse 2 and 3, and it says, "Consider it all joy, brothers and sisters, through trials and tribulations." And I'm like, seriously? That's what I'm being given? But what I learned from that is to open up and be able to talk to the nurses when I finally could talk, and listen to their story and try to help them out and just pray for them. And here's somebody that's sick, that they're healing. What I'm learning now is that it was healing for them. And so for me to give gave me joy, and it gave me the fight. The other fight was my wife came in every day, and I looked forward to it every day. She was what I looked forward to. And she was my biggest advocate. She would find out things. She would find out that my feet had wounds and my back had wounds and all these other things were falling apart. But she would go to fight for me. And she just was the rock star. She did everything from very transparent blog to just showing up and just being amazing. And it really, just stemmed my love for her. It just, if there was another level to go, we went there.
And you both you're on the same journey, but you're on separate journeys.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there was some misunderstanding or not enough understanding, like not feeling loved. We talked about that.
Yeah.
Or I love you so much that I'm gonna squeeze you until you break. But those are the things that we take for granted that we not get to do again.
Yeah.
When you got on that, so we're gonna go a little bit further now into, you had just shared with me before we started here that you were in a wheelchair just up until a few months ago.
Yep.
Because you also spoke about how you were going to be maybe in an assisted living and you were going to not be able to walk and talk.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about that journey, of that healing.
I think what's really great is this is the component of power of prayer. And we had thousands and thousands of people. Even our own church did a 24-hour prayer vigils, which I've never seen or heard about, but people stepped in the gap and they heard, and that was amazing. And to be the recipient of a true miracle, because everybody in the medical field said I was dead. And all these people over here said, no, not on my watch. So you have this pool of yin and yang, and it was just amazing to be a part of it, but overwhelming as well, and very humbling. So that allowed a lot of my faith to be re-energized, because people showed up. They were generous with time and their talents and finances, like I'd never seen before. And then all the prayer that they said that I wasn't going to be able to do. In the last 16 months, I've had an average of 4 to 5 days of PT. I've had wheelchairs. I have a whole new respect for trying to push yourself into the restroom and get bounced back from their spring door. Just the learning and how to relearn it. So if you ever see a 1-year-old and then, and just see how they need their mom, and it felt like that. But to learn all the steps and see how I'm doing. I just got tennis shoes like less than a month ago. I've been wearing flip-flops, so shoes are a big deal. Stamina is a big deal. The other thing is I did not lose any short-term or long-term memory, which my oxygen level got down to 50% on numerous occasions, so I shouldn't remember anything.
Wow.
And I think, Karen, that was one of the things that was funny to me, because my wife came in with all these questions. What's our password? Where do you live? What kind of car do you have?
We have the memory.
So there's this daunting list, and she didn't know what she was going to get when I woke up. So, I can't even imagine. And so now it's really, we want to show that there's hope, and that the power of prayer is amazing. And people showing up was a big thing for our family. And just even now, almost 15, 16 months.
21.
Yeah, there. See, that's that COVID brain.
There's that memory. You did lose part of it.
I did.
So before I ask my final question, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to make sure is known? Because there's a stigma and there's opinions that people have out there about what COVID was or is.
I would say that this is a super long journey, and we're fighting it every day. 21 months out, we're still fighting it. Brian is still fighting neuropathy. He's still fighting pain, constant pain. He cannot taste. He has some brain issues, and he looks fine. And so a lot of people assume, like you were talking about, how he looks fine. And they will see him and think, oh, he was sick, but now he's fine. But he is not. So that is something that really frustrates me, because I'm like, he is not fine. And they expect him to be doing all the things he used to do. He is not able to, but he wants to, because he does not want to be seen as disabled more than anything else. That is something he does not want to be seen as, but he is not yet where he was. And I don't know if he'll ever get there, but I do wish that people had more compassion and could let him go at his own pace instead of expecting him to be back. People aren't always what they look like they are.
No, they're not. There are people that are walking around with trauma in their hearts and in their minds, and you would think that you see them and they look put together, and you'd say, oh, must be nice, but you don't know, because not everyone's going to be vulnerable, as you both have right here, to share your journey and to look like you got it put together, when in fact you're still broken inside, and you will be for a long time. We're always going to have broken pieces.
Our teenagers face that so much, because they're girls and they're teenage girls, and they have to look a certain way, and they are hurting inside. And it makes me, when you talk about mourning, there's so much to mourn. There's mourning our past life. There's mourning who we were before we got broken. There's mourning our financial situation and our friends. Like some drop off because you know
They
you
don't understand.
You're kind of the downer at the party.
They don't
so
understand the journey.
there is a lot to mourn. We have
Absolutely.
I mean, we got to keep Brian, but we lost so much of our life.
But you have a second chance,
Yeah.
which we don't always get second chances.
We can rebuild.
There is a second chance.
We can
It's a
rebuild.
different one now. It's one that has
Yeah.
different things that have come about. So I do have one final question for each of you, and it's not related, but kind of is. I love asking this question. If there was one question that I was allowed to ask a person to know anything about who they are or who I think they are with not having visually seen them, so if we close our eyes, everyone's the same in my opinion, right? It would be this question, and I'm going to start with Karen, because I think yours is going to be a little bit longer. I could be wrong too. What message would you like to leave everyone based on your journey of life?
On this journey with Brian?
Your journey. You can say your entire life, what you've gone through, whatever that journey you feel is the one that you want to share with everyone.
That we need each other. I know that we can be isolated, we can hide behind our computers and feel like we don't need other people. You need a community. And if you don't have one, I will help you get one. You need a community because you never know when the wheels are going to fall off. And when they do, you're going to need people to be there. And you need to be there for others too, because that helps you heal.
I like that. We do hide behind our computers, our phones, and some people can't leave their homes. So there's a different world on that one too, that they're hiding from, that they don't have the outside world as community as we have the ability to walk outside this door. So there's a different type of community behind those screens too. Same question for you, unless you want me to ask that question again.
No, that it's easy for me. It's three things. It's you have to have faith. That's one thing that got me through this was my faith. I'd never felt alone, even though I was helpless. Faith got me through. Family, having family is important, and health. You got to have your health. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And if you don't have anything, then you can't be a good friend. You can't be a good employee. So health is very much important. But I say those three, if you're good in those areas, then the rest will fall into place. And don't do anything alone. If you're going through something mentally, physically, do not do this alone. And be transparent. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of saying, I can't do it myself. And where others are there to help you. And that's the thing I think that we saw community come together like I've never seen it. And so that's why I say I've seen it. So please, if you're dealing with anything on any type of level, reach out. There's numerous ways for help. And it's free. And like Karen said, if you're looking for friends, we'll be a friend.
New friends right here. I got mine. You get your own. Life is precious. Time is a precious increment of life. I say that all the time because I have my own story. And when I sit here with as many people as I have, I'm always reminded that time and memories are very precious. You had one, I wouldn't say scripture, I believe it. I'm not Bible. Remember, I'm not know everything in the Bible. But I want you to recite what you put in here with 2 Corinthians.
There's so much stuff.
It was at the top of your notes on number 8.
Okay, thank you, number 8. It was actually 2 Corinthians, and it's 12:11, and it says, "For when I am weak, then I am strong."
I felt that to be appropriate to close our show out with. Thank you both for being my guests, being vulnerable, and sharing your journey
for having us.
To break some stigmas and maybe answer some questions that people didn't know they could get an answer to.
And if you want more to the story, just follow Karen's blog at Caringbridge.
I believe that Karen's blog will be available for that. And again, I thank you both.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. I was on a verge of tears for sure. I want to thank my studio sponsor, the Motivated Mind Group, your global creative agency based right here in downtown Chandler. If you have a story you want to share, know someone who has a story that would help them on their journey, just as we've heard today, please email me to the address of stories@christinehotchkiss.com. If you'd like to be a sponsor, please also email me to the address of stories@christinehotchkiss.com. Until next time, everyone, I wish you well, and you take care.